For more on this development, we are joined via Skype by Kashmiri political anthropologist Ather Zia from the University of Northern Colorado, United States of America. Ather, good evening and thank you so much for joining us on The Globe.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Now, this is one of the most dangerous nuclear flashpoints. Should the world be concerned?
Well, I think the world, even if it was not a dangerous nuclear flashpoint, the world should be concerned because it is about people. It is about these people who have been clamoring for their rights for the last 77 years. And considering that both the nations are nuclear and both the nations have the capability to destroy the entire subcontinent and then some, I think it is of immense it's an immense responsibility upon the global community to pay attention to what's happening in this region. And also considering the human suffering that we are facing right now, as the government of India has laid down a 6-day-long siege under which people cannot do anything. They cannot communicate outside. There's restrictions on their mobility. They cannot talk on phones. Everything is under lockdown and severe restrictions that they are facing. And the diaspora is also concerned, and I'm part of the diaspora, and we do not know how to get back in touch with our families, and we don't know anything. There is news trickling out, but it's not enough for us to know that they're safe. And then we also have a reason to believe that this is very, very dangerous, even though there's a clampdown, because we know that the government of India knows there's going to be a backlash, that people are going to be protesting. And we know that sometimes when there's going to be some relaxation, as we have seen in a BBC video come out, in the Al Jazeera report that just came out, that people are coming out of their homes in droves to protest. And there is indiscriminate firing also going on, which the BBC video showed just a while back. It's doing rounds on the social media right now. So we have a reason to believe that the entire population is under danger.
Now, Ather, you touched on something that's very key, and this is what we're being touting, that these are two very dangerous nuclear powers. With regards to being nuclear powers, looking at the West and their actions taken against Iran for being, a nuclear power as well, and North Korea, why is this particular region of the world being treated differently? India, Pakistan?
Well, I think it's also about the location. It's also about how the stakes that the Western powers have in Kashmir. Kashmir doesn't have any oil, so to speak. Kashmir does have lots of water resources that the countries are actually fighting upon. Resources is what it boils down to, as many Kashmiris right now say, that it's not about people. It's not that India is not clamping down on Kashmir, and it doesn't want to integrate Kashmir because of people, but because of the land, because of resources. It's a very coveted piece of it's a very coveted piece of land that is very strategically situated, and it has China on one side, it has Pakistan on the other, and India on the other side. So why West has not paid attention, that's a long story, but I wouldn't say that West has not been paying attention to Kashmir, so to speak. It is dealing with Pakistan on a different issue. It is dealing with India. It's one of the largest trading partners. So there's lots of investment going on in the region, different kinds of political investment. There is trade, and there are other alliances going on with India. So it's kind of that's very worrying that they are nuclear nations, but the same onus is not placed on them as it is placed elsewhere.
Now, who stands to lose here in the event of such a conflict?
I think the entire world stands to lose, because if there is a nuclear war, if it comes to that, because right now both the countries, India is very belligerent and Pakistan has been taking it very studied. It's considering, it's a very deliberate response that they're giving. So we do see that at the moment, but we do not know what's going to happen, because this is the entire region at stake. And what we see happening, that the majority of the suffering is going to be in Kashmir right now, as we see. It's in the last 33 years as this conflict has come, this conflict is kind of brewing, and this conflict is kind of growing and growing for the last 33 years. It's the Kashmiris who are doing the dying. It's the Kashmiris who are on both sides of the LOC, which is the line of control that demarcates the two parts of Kashmir, one that is under the administration of Pakistan and one that is under the authority of India. So that's what we see. We see that it's Kashmiris who are standing to lose, then both the countries, because huge defense budgets go on to maintain the control on these regions.
How does the latest developments, which include a curfew, affect ordinary people in Kashmir?
Well, it's affecting them very badly. For the last 6 days, they have had very little to no contact with the rest of the world. I haven't been able to contact my family back there. My parents are there, my siblings are there, my entire family, so to speak, is there. So we don't know anything about them, except there's a little bit of trickle here and there. And we see that some hospitals have Wi-Fi connections. There is a Wi-Fi connection close to the airport. So people are somehow trying to send messages to other people, which is not possible. What we have seen so far is that they are able to contact outside through some glitch connection, but they're not able to contact each other inside Kashmir, because that's the fear that government of India has, that people will congregate, people will share knowledge. They didn't, I don't think till 1 or 2 days later, they didn't even know that what has actually been done, because even cable television was suspended. They had a bit of some kind of a dish TV going on, but not everyone has that. So, and of course, now we are also hearing about lessening food supplies. We are hearing about medical aid that's not reaching people. We are hearing about all kinds of human emergencies that can happen when you do not have access to any kind of communication. You have no mobility at all. The government of India and the administrators inside Kashmir right now are trying to kind of like give camouflage all of this as for the safety of Kashmiri people. And then what they're also saying is that, because the Eid al-Zuha, which is celebrated by Muslims all around the world, it's going to be celebrated in a couple of days. So the government is kind of showing to the world that they're very benevolent and they have provided some supplies. But what we hear from various little posts on social media, that people are not accepting such kind of relief. They do not want anything to be, given to them, which the government is going to appropriate as people being okay, people being comfortable. And people are not comfortable. People are not okay. People are really, really up in arms. There are reports that some of the journalists, Indian journalists who have gone into Kashmir, everyone is predicting that this is a lull before the storm. We know something very immense is going to happen, and we fear for the safety of all the people that are in the region right now. So they are facing immense shortages. They are facing communication blackouts. There are kids that are studying outside in India. They're abroad, and they haven't been able to get in touch with their families. And some of them are also looking to travel for Eid, which is the holy day. And they don't have money to go back home. So there are all kinds of emergencies that are erupting all across social media, where Kashmiri diaspora is trying to get together to help these kids go home, or help them get supplies or some kind of help. But the other side is that government of India and the administration inside Kashmir, it's trying to show as if it's trying to help these people. But actually, on ground, people are not accepting that help. And also these students, the governor, who is not an elected official in Kashmir, he had declared that he's going to give 100,000 rupees, Indian rupees, to people outside Kashmir, to these students to help them celebrate Eid. They have categorically refused that, and they're saying that this is they do not accept this when a deliberate effort has been done to decimate their identity. So that's the kind of narrative that is coming out, and that is the kind of narrative that we know would come out when they would revoke this article.
Now, Ather, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi speaks of ridding the area of terrorism. Is this area a nesting ground for terrorism? Just going back to the fact that you mentioned that what the Indian government is doing is camouflage.
Exactly. When you use the word terrorism, and when Narendra Modi uses the word terrorism, we also have to understand, like, what are they contextualizing and narrativizing as terrorism? This is a genuine indigenous pro-freedom movement. This is a movement exactly like the movement that Indian people had when they were fighting the British. There's no doubt about that. So when they say terrorism, it's not creating terror. it's actually making their voice heard. And Kashmiris from 1947 onwards, when they became two nations, have been trying to speak. They have been, when India was having its Quit India movement, Kashmir was having its Quit Kashmir movement at that time. In 1931, 22 Kashmiris were massacred in broad daylight to demanding a sovereign Kashmir, demanding freedom. So this is an indigenous movement that has gone on for the last 77 years or more. And then camouflaging and kind of like masking it as terrorism is just deluding the world community. I think the world community needs to ask the question that if Narendra Modi, if the BJP government, if the entire India and the masses are packaging this as being good for Kashmiris, then why are Kashmiris under curfew? Why aren't they allowed to be outside in the streets expressing their opinion? Why is there such a media lockdown? Why is there so much curtailment on their mobility? So even the journalists, there was one journalist who was able to, I think he wrote a status. I haven't yet caught up with that news because there's so much else going on. He was able to say, he said something about the situation, and I think he's also been taken into, he's under complete duress about the honesty with which he tried to say something. So why is there so much clampdown? Or what is government of India afraid of? So that's a question that we need to ask. And if we ask that question, we are going to go towards the history, which is going to show that this is not terrorism. This is an indigenous, genuine movement for self-determination and independence of the region.
There are fears of ethnic cleansing, that Hindus will flock to the region to push out the Muslims once and for all. How is this fear shaping opinion in the Muslim neighbors of the two countries?
Sorry, I didn't catch the full question.
I was just trying to find out with regards to the, claims or fears of ethnic cleansing in the region and Hindus flocking to the region to push out the Muslims. How is this fear shaping opinion in the Muslim neighbors of the two countries?
Well, the thing is that so Kashmiris have always been a syncretic nation. They have lived together. There have been Muslims, there have been Pandits, which are the Hindus. There are Christians, and there is a considerable Buddhist population. And when we talk about ethnic cleansing, when we talk about these fears, a lot of people are like, the Kashmiri Muslims do not want these people to come in, and what kind of attitude is that to living in a civilization? The thing is that Kashmiris are not afraid of any organic cultural flux going on, but this is not that. Till now, the kind of protest that we see that is currently building inside Kashmir, and that they have been expressing for the last 30 years actively, is because they want to protect their territorial sovereignty. The law that was revoked, the article, that was revoked, had a very important clause, another article in it, which was the Article 35A, which was protecting their territorial sovereignty, because this was a nation when it was when India told it to integrate with it. And I say India told it because there is so much politics there where the people asked at that time whether they want to integrate or not. And that's particularly the issue, that it was a separate country. And then the special status was given because even the king was not fully keen to join and give up his independence. And even the people were for independence. And then there was this clause for plebiscite that you will decide, because that was the logic of a partition of India and Pakistan, that you could either go with Pakistan, either go with India. But considerable population inside Kashmir, they did want independence. So that all was packaged inside this plebiscite, that we will give you plebiscite and we will give you the right to self-determination as mandated by the UN, as agreed by both the countries. And that's what Kashmiris are demanding right now. But there is a very fierce sentiment that there needs to be the third option of independence. But so when we think about ethnic cleansing, right now, Kashmiris are very fearful of the demographic, what they call demographic terrorism, what many legal scholars call demographic terrorism, that there's going to be a concerted effort on part of the Indian government to change the demography of the region, to change the Muslim majority so that it's going to go towards full integration with India, which they have done currently, which is equivalent to annexation, what they have done in the past 10 days.
Now, but what gave Prime Minister Narendra Modi this brazen outlook to take this action, and why now?
I think Narendra Modi is right now, I think he's at a place where he controls both the houses, and they have been able to package their manifesto in a way that this is going to be a nation that is very proud of their Hindu identity. It is a Hindu right-wing, a supremacist party that has been able to permeate into the deep, visceral attitudes of Indians, and that's what we see as this was unfolding on social media, on the ground. You saw so much venom and so much vehemence and so much hostility towards Kashmiris. They were talking about going and buying land in Kashmir. These were Hindu masses. These were the Indian masses. Right now, Modi, who is controlling India, the entire India, they have been able to engineer a political outlook where they think that it's all to be Indianized, it's all to be saffronized, and it's all to be everyone has to toe the same line. Basically, we see lynchings happening all across India, and now Indians have become very impervious to that. And before that, they had totally become impervious to killings of Kashmiris. And right now, as we speak, and as this was declared that they are revoking the article, you saw a lot of Indians talking about marrying Kashmiri girls, talking about having children with Kashmiri girls who are going to be Indians. All kinds of harassment that could be put into motion has already been put into motion inside India against Kashmiri students, which we are seeing coming up, and we don't know how worse it will get. They're talking about buying land, which I don't know how reasonable it is, because there's no clarity on the territorial sovereignty of Kashmir, and when they're revoking this article, what exactly is going to happen, and also what's going to happen to the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which declares entire Kashmir a disturbed region, and the entire power technically resides with the army, the Indian army, which has been imposing impunity on the entire region. There's human rights violations. More than 100,000 people have been killed, both combatants and non-combatants, for the past 33 years. There are more than 10,000 disappearances, and there are rape, as Human Rights Watch has already said, has been used as a weapon of war. So that's what we are talking about. We are talking about also talking about settler colonialism. These fears are real. It's not the fear of organic movement of people, a benign movement of people where there is a syncretic culture is erupting. This is more like a situation where you have a West Bank in the making.
Now, Ather, to the United Nations now, or basically the UN Security Council has so far passed several resolutions which call for the right to self-determination, which you touched on earlier, to decide its political future by people of the Muslim majority region. And this action by India, is New Delhi undermining the UN?
New Delhi has undermined the UN since Cold War kind of sidelined the UN from Kashmir. But Kashmiris have never forgotten United Nations, because they've always made United Nations and the right to self-determination their central demand. But India has already undermined United Nations. And this happened towards the late 50s, early 60s, when the resolutions stopped coming from UN. Because Cold War had set in, and United Nations was kind of becoming redundant for both India and Pakistan. Pakistan less so, because it still believes in self-determination for the people of the region. And India was always adamant that this is not something, although they were the ones who had taken it to United Nations Security Council in the first place. So what also happens in the preceding years is that India and Pakistan have come together several times without asking Kashmiris. And that's one of the most contentious issue here, that Kashmiris have never been asked. So they do come together at several times, especially in 1972, to draft this agreement called the Shimla Agreement, where they decide to mediate, where they decide to negotiate with each other without a third-party intervention, almost believing that it's about them. And because Kashmiris at that time, there were internal machinations happening inside the region. There were all kinds of governments that were predetermined, especially inside Indian-controlled Kashmir. They were kind of providing governance, and that was their engagement. And they were always provided this idea of development, which Modi is selling even now. So they were engaged in that. They were also engaged in a movement of plebiscite. which was cruelly shut down. They were also engaged in a armed movement in the 60s, which again was shut down. So that was happening there while the two countries were talking to each other in a bilateral kind of a way, totally sidelining the Kashmiris. So that's what was happening in the 70s. But when the armed struggle broke out, Kashmiris brought UN back bang in the middle because they made it a motif. Every time there was a protest, one time there was a very, very big protest in Srinagar city, which went to the United Nations headquarters. So now United Nations has 44 installations around Kashmir, especially around the LOC, which it is observing. But then it also has headquarters in the center of the city, where most of the government offices are and their palatial residences are. People always would go there to register the protest, and it became a thing in Kashmir to give a memorandum to the United Nations observer, whoever would be at that time. So that's something. So people have always invoked United Nations, but July 2018 becomes very, very important for the entire global community to know, which is when the United Nations Human Rights Commission, they published a report which was based on remote investigation because India did not allow them to go inside. And that came out, and where it was repeated that Kashmiris should have the right to self-determination. So what I like to see this as a continuation of that what has happened since 1947 vis-a-vis UN.
Now, Pakistan has already started lobbying for action by the UN. What direction do you think that this will take?
We do have, there is a statement from the United Nations that this is a dispute that they should solve bilaterally. It's a very neutral, very studied kind of a response that has been given, but there should be some action because there is United Nations Human Rights Commission report which talks about the region. There is a moral responsibility there to the people, and it's not, there is this sentiment. And there is this, the line of questioning regarding Kashmir is always about laws. It's always about statutes. There is a genuine history there, that there is a historical wrong that has been committed that these people are asking to set right. And with what's happening right now, people are asking each Kashmiri, whenever there's questions, whenever there's interviews, to kind of like set the historical, context right. But the fact is that Kashmiris in every decade have been asking for the right to self-determination. And when Pakistan right now is going out to bat for them, it's also talking about its side, which is under its control. Although it has autonomy, it hasn't dismantled it in the same manner that India did. So it does have a leg to stand on and talk about it. There are also fears that India is going to ask the UN, if it comes to those negotiations, that it's going to talk about the other side. So we don't know how it's going to pan out. But right now, I think things are heating up. People will be coming out onto the streets of Kashmir. There is going to be some kind of a response that we may or may not like. And Pakistan is also going to do what it needs to do. And it is approaching United Nations Security Council. It is approaching the world bodies. And I think that's a good way to go. And we're all watching that. And we all hope that something comes out of that. And then Kashmiris are also not taking it light down. There are many people in the diaspora. There are many people who are thinking about legal and judicial contestations to this particular revocation that has been done.
Ather, I need to just come in there very quickly. We have run out of time, but I have to find out from you with regards to this conflict and everything that is taking place currently in Kashmir. Is this not an issue that Britain needs to come in and resolve, looking at the history of the role that Britain played in Kashmir? And is there any role that the US can also play in this region?
Well, I don't know how useful these roles would be in terms of the kind of mediations and negotiations that both the countries have done, and the brunt that the world is bearing out of those negotiations and out of those meddlings. So I don't know whether that would be a good option. But at the same time, what is the other option? Who is going to talk to both these countries, and who is going to be the authority, a moral authority? There is no moral authority currently in the world that could be taking these two nations to task. I feel like the global community needs to be aware, and UN, so to speak, could be asked to intervene because it does have the historical authority. There was a time when the United Nations actually had a plebiscite administrator that would go to the region and talk to the people, trying to come up with plans to hold the plebiscite. So I think that is the way to go. We have to demilitarize the zone. We have to decolonize the zone, and then the zone has to be brought under international authority of some sort. I don't know how that's going to look like. And then we have to let this region rest and heal so that something can come out of it that is not hegemonic, that is not colonialism in this new mask of development that Modi is talking about.
Ather, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure having this discussion with you. That is Kashmiri political anthropologist Ather Zia from the University of Northern Colorado, United States of America. And she is the author of Resisting Disappearance, Military Occupation and Women's Activism in Kashmir.